Okay, so how everything sort of happened was if you were to take a sort of linear time construct way about it, and that's sort of an inside joke, but what happened was I discovered the Mandela Effect on YouTube. And whenever I discovered the Mandela Effect, I think I pretty much found it like everyone else did. It was sort of on a lot of the larger channels, a lot of the more poppy kind of channels, and it was sort of the kind of surface ME things that generally most people at the first stage they'll find. Life was like a box of chocolates, Bernstein versus Bernstein, the standard fare kind of thing. And then as I started to really think about the Mandela effect, I was very much familiar with conspiracy culture anyway, but the Mandela effect, for some reason, it really resonated with me. And then I started to listen to disparate other videos that were probably a level deeper about the Mandela effect. I started to hear 4chan strands talking about reality being kind of a matrix, talking about reality itself being uploaded to servers, and all kinds of really out there ideas about what happened. But what really spooked me out was a video about the Lindbergh baby. And I couldn't actually remember, did they or did they not find the Lindbergh baby? And this was early on. I would say that for me, it was sometime around September, October 2016 when it really started to hit me. And one of the conclusions that the person on the video came to was that the reason why we're not remembering whether or not the Lindbergh baby was found or wasn't found was that we're already all in the afterlife. And that really shook me up quite a bit. It came together at a perfect time in my life because I had recently had a string of deaths in my family. So I started thinking about life and the afterlife and the meaning of life and all of these really deep philosophical things that you do from time to time when things change all around you all of a sudden. And then I remembered Terrence McKenna and his Time Wave Zero in 2012 and how it ended in 2012. And then I remembered everything that was building up towards that 2012 thing, right? And the whole zeitgeist idea, the singularity. And I just started to think about the Mandela effect. And I was sort of doing this thought exercise, sort of on the fly, off the cuff. What if the Mandela effect itself is the first sort of symptoms of reality itself breaking down? Because at the time, what was very popular with the Mandela effect was it was CERN, CERN, CERN. They had turned on their particle smasher, and somehow we all got sucked into some sort of black hole, or there's a million other subsets of what happened in terms of the CERN idea or the CERN world of the Mandela effect. And it's almost limitless, the ideas of what CERN did to us. But I went into another different direction altogether. And I started thinking about the idea of what if there was a mass extinction event. And the one video about the Lindbergh baby, he wasn't very specific, but I started to think about trauma because when I was 17, I was in a terrible car accident and I had a near death experience. I was under for about 2 weeks and I don't remember really the accident. And I only remember bits and pieces during the accident as it was happening until I went to the operating room. And then I don't remember anything after that. So it was a very traumatic event for me. And I started to think about what if, that's, you've got the macro and then, you've got the micro. And I remember how I reacted, me as an individual, to a traumatic event like that. And it took, I'd say, a good year for me to really get back on my feet mentally after something like that. And I started just to play around with that idea, a mass traumatic event. And at the time, there was such a beating around 2012. It was almost like it was in the air, and everyone used that word at the time, the zeitgeist. That was the thing at the time. It was such a hip thing that everybody was saying. But also, too, it felt a lot like the 2000 thing, the Y2K thing. It was just everywhere. It was in the air. You could feel it. It was electrical. So I decided to put the two together. And at the time, I had a YouTube video with really nothing on it. So by my second video, I started to form that idea. And the way that I put it was, what if instead of CERN for the Mandela Effect, there was a mass extinction event during 2012, and as we try to cope with collectively we're coping with the trauma, what we're all doing is sort of playing out our lives in a way that we think it should have played out. And I said, in terms of the extinction event itself, imagine it being like a rock hitting a calm body of water. And those echoes is what I called them, how they kind of wave out away from that trauma event of the rock hitting the calm body of water. And I said, those echoes, they get more and more faint. And as they do, they dissolve into a silence. But if we are those ripples, we're going to dissolve into probably more chaos, right? And that would be the breaking down of those things. And the Mandela Effect is a perfect example of the breakdown of those kinds of things. Because ultimately, what we're talking about is something very profound that I think a lot of people miss, that are sort of on the pop level, sort of clickbait level of the Mandela Effect. What we're really talking about is what we've assumed about the linear construct of time, that there's a past, there's a present, and there's the future. And the only thing that's supreme is the present. The present will determine what's in the future, and the past is now completely muzzled, and it's sort of frozen, and it cannot be moved. Now, what we're talking about with the Mandela Effect is something incredibly profound, that the past is not at rest. The past indeed is changing. And what if this is the beginning of the past coming alive? Now, certainly something had to have happened, or something would have had to have changed. And at that time, I hadn't gotten that far with it, really. By that point, I was still going with the 2012 thing, and I was really trying to understand life and death and what it all means. And that's where I started my We Died in 2012 series. And because of the We Died in 2012 series, my second video, it was crazy. I got to tell you, it blew up overnight. It was very strange. And I think I did the video that afternoon, and by the next day, I had maybe 4,000 or 5,000 views. And you've got to keep in mind, at the time, my channel was just maybe a dozen, 2 dozen followers, if that. And it was mostly people, my fellow cohorts, MEs on YouTube. And I don't know how it caught on or what happened, but eventually, over the coming weeks and months, it ended up getting, I think we're running at 162,000 views. And to this day, I'm only a channel on YouTube. I think I'm just breaking 3,700 subs. So to have like 100,000 views, it was out of control. I ended up having to turn off my notifications on my phone because it was blowing up so bad on my phone. So obviously, a lot of people had an opinion about this, and it was disturbing a lot of people. And I realized that you can just put an idea out about life and death and something very basic, and it can really shake people up. You can really do a number on someone just by posing an idea. And the way in which I posed the idea, because you got to understand, at the time when I started the We Died in 2012 series, I didn't expect an audience like that, and a diverse audience like that, meaning it was all over the world and all different kinds of people. And to this day, I still don't understand what happened. My biggest day, I think I had like 5,000 or 10,000 views in one day. And by that point, I may have had 400 or 500 subs at the time. So it was very disproportionate to exactly what I was. One of the ones that I always use, and I use it for a couple of reasons, and I actually used it this last week. What you need to do is find someone that you respect that is probably in their late 40s onward, and someone who watched Johnny Carson. And it's perfect. What you do is you say, "Do you remember Ed McMahon?" And most of the time, because back then there were only usually 3 channels and maybe 2 or 3 local channels that everyone had. So there's a good chance that they remember who Ed McMahon was. And what you do is you say, do you remember anything else he did besides the Johnny Carson show? And they'll obviously bring up the talent show he did, and that's fine. But no matter what, I have yet to find someone who doesn't bring this up. They'll bring up Publishers Clearinghouse. And I'll ask them without leading them whatsoever, because they have no idea what I'm about to let them know about. Okay, Publishers Clearinghouse, that's great. Can you specifically tell me about what he did with Publishers Clearinghouse? And they, to the person, and I understand this is just myself and my own kind of poll, but to the person, they go, well, they would arrive in this van and they would roll up with this big check and balloons, and it was the Publishers Clearinghouse check where you win $1 million and everybody would jump up and down and they would be excited. Then you tell them, no, that never happened. Then they start to battle with you. Yes, it did. And then finally you get to the point where you have to just Google it and wiki it. And you've got to see the looks. It's anywhere from horror to they still don't believe it to they don't believe it never happened. And then the excuse that's given from Wiki to Google that we've all misremembered. And this ME makes it so profound is it's twofold. One, in order for this ME to not be true and for us to be misremembering, you have to have made this up in your head on your own and carried it with you until the internet age was created. Okay? You had to all remember it the same exact way. And then you have to all misremember it the same exact way. And then whenever you find out that it never happened, you see, you have to still stick with that belief inside your own personal head. Because not one person that I talk to that remembers, they don't remember him bringing up a pony or a cannonball with like glitter. Every detail they remember is the check, the balloons, the excitement, the jumping up and down. They drive up in a van. It's Publishers Clearinghouse. There's a couple people there who are wearing suits. There's usually a couple jumping up and down. They're very excited. So it's always the same thing. And science, what they're saying about the Mandela Effect and why this particular one is so powerful is that indeed, simultaneously, everyone created this in their mind and they held it for decades since the 80s. They said that it's a common misnomer that he worked for Publishers Clearinghouse and that Ed McMahon actually worked for a competitor. And that competitor indeed had its own campaign and that everyone is remembering it incorrectly. But the big thing about the Publishers Clearinghouse thing is they're saying that the commercials and all those checks and all of those things, that never happened.